Most wars are fought over the possession of land. From the southeastern corner of the Asian continent extends a peninsula which contains 6 countries. This area of the world, long known as Indochina, has seen the devastation of war since man first discovered that the land was rich and productive. In this decade, Vietnam is the country which is in the mind of most people. And to understand Vietnam, we must start with the land and the people, the elements which make up this troubled country. It is a nation of various ethnic groups, with 5 languages which divide the country like a patchwork quilt. It is a country trying to emerge into the 20th century, only to be threatened by a tyranny which would turn back time. The terrain of Vietnam varies from matted delta jungle to fog-cloaked mountain peaks. Highly seasonal monsoon rainfall, which varies monthly from a trace to more than 15 inches. Buildings which are made from boxes salvaged from an Army PX. Or architecture which would grace an avenue in Paris. People who live a sophisticated urban life, or tough mountain tribesmen. A sunny sandy beach, an ancient Asian temple, a sidewalk cafe. Vietnam today is a strange mosaic, composed of light and dark chips of life. The capital is Saigon, a city built for 500,000 people, crowded today with more than 6 times that many. People who are often oblivious to the dull rumble of bombs only 15 miles away. A city fashioned with the charm and beauty of colonial France, but a city which is jarred by the explosions of communist terrorists. Rubble-strewn streets and maimed bodies eloquently testify that Vietnam is involved in a war which is different. More than a decade ago, the French found out how different war in Vietnam could be. Their modern, well-equipped army marched down this road. The road led to a staggering defeat. French casualties of more than 250,000 men, and half of Vietnam slipped behind the bamboo curtain. The truce which effected the partition of Vietnam was uneasy, just a breather while the communists regrouped and began their infiltration of southern Vietnam. Today, the same enemy forces which defeated the French are again fighting in the jungles of Vietnam, and the technology of the free world is pitted against a communist guerrilla army. So once again, the jungles of Vietnam are dotted with berets. Only this time, the berets are worn by American soldiers, not French. And now the jungles are filled with the sound of an important new weapon in the arsenal of the free world. The sound is from a helicopter. A new breed of helicopter which has learned to fight. The Army calls them Hueys. Over the years, the one constant in Vietnam has been the natural environment, a climate and terrain which actually precludes full-scale land warfare. Vietnam is typical of most developing countries in that mobility becomes the key to success in countering military subversion. Obviously, when both terrain and climate make surface mobility a virtual impossibility, helicopters become even more appealing than usual. Let us look at the Huey helicopter, how it is used, and why it may well be the point on which the war in Vietnam may turn. Night has always been the ally of the guerrilla. In Vietnam, it was the time he moved his men and supplies, usually over the waterways that lace the country. But the sanctuary of darkness has been pierced. A dusk-to-dawn curfew of Vietnamese river traffic means that if it is moving at night, it is Viet Cong. Low-flying, armed Hueys quickly sweep the rivers and canals, destroying links in the Ho Chi Minh Trail that connect the guerrilla with his supply base in North Vietnam. Dawn of almost any day in Vietnam will find this scene taking place: the arming of the assault ships for the start of a reconnaissance mission. The Huey has become a versatile gun platform. Some configurations of the Bell UH-1B are armed with exterior-mounted M6 machine guns and 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets. Another version has large pods carrying a very substantial volume of firepower in its 48 rockets. Today, in this particular combat sector, the reconnaissance is to precede a major airlift of U.S. soldiers and men of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Hueys are woven through the entire operations of U.S. and RVN forces. There are 9 separate functions which are performed by this rotary wing aircraft. One of the most important developments has been the armed assault helicopter, a concept which would have been unthinkable as little as 10 years ago. The assault ships take off and climb to an altitude of 1,500 feet, flying a loose, free-floating, staggered trail formation. The area to be reconnoitered is first flown over at altitude to permit careful observation from the relative safety of at least 1,500 feet. Care must be taken not to fly parallel to tree lines or roads, and not to follow each other. If the ground track of helicopters coincide, they are more apt to attract enemy fire. Low reconnaissance is made at virtual treetop level, making several passes back and forth from different directions. It is a slow and painstaking process to check out an area, and there is the constant danger of enemy ground fire. But this reconnaissance precedes an air-mobile assault, and the threat of ambush must be eliminated before the unarmed helicopters arrive. Back at base camp, American and Vietnamese troops are loaded into troop-carrying Hueys. These combat troops will be airlifted to the area where an enemy force is operating. In this war, the Huey has often replaced the familiar 6x6 truck of World War II, or even the Jeep. For in a country which hampers orthodox ground mobility, the key to deployment of troops is the helicopter. At the target area, the heavy fire teams have begun their job of softening up the selected landing zone. Firing passes begin about 2,500 yards from the target. Both teams strike simultaneously, each directing their fire at half of the landing zone. Strafing fire is concentrated in the areas which afford the Viet Cong cover and concealment, such as the raised mound which separates rice paddies, or the bordering shallow canals in which a man can lie and hide. Assault techniques with helicopters are different from those used by fixed-wing aircraft. Firing is normally broken off about 500 yards from the enemy so that the helicopter does not have to overfly the target. This reduces the vulnerability of the helicopter to ground fire. carefully coordinated assault, as the troop-carrying helicopters are on final approach, a light fire team flies into the landing area and marks the actual touchdown points with flares. Recommended approach directions, wind, the enemy situation. All this information is radioed back to the troop-carrying ships. Armed escort picks up the troop carriers as they move out. Once on the ground, the war becomes what infantry fighting has always been: fire and move. And concealment. But all of Vietnam is not large military operations such as this. In a war which has no single definitive front, any day one can find combat operations taking place at widely scattered locations, operations which require different tactics. South of Saigon, in the rice-rich Delta, the order of the day may well be flushing small bands of individual terrorists from the countryside. Armed Viet Cong bandits who prey on the villagers, exacting high ransom in crops and money, spreading terror and assassination. But finding the enemy, which may be lying in a rice paddy, breathing through a reed, can be difficult. Without a Huey, it would be almost impossible. There are some areas where the tactical situation precludes even a helicopter landing. And so, from the air, men have to be para-dropped directly into the combat zone. There is a need for search and rescue missions, the recovery of downed pilots deep in enemy territory, either in South or North Vietnam. A frequently used technique is to rappel men down to the ground. In a few moments of hover, even disabled personnel can be plucked from the most perilous environment or terrain. Huey does many jobs, like providing fire direction for the massive B-52 bombers of the Air Force. Flying close to the surface of the Earth, they are able to provide the precise degree of correction needed for effective high-altitude bombers. Immediate damage assessment can be made, and the results of the bombing runs evaluated almost before the smoke has cleared. Helicopter mobility means small things as well as large. The luxury of a hot meal to men who are combat weary and tired of cold, canned field rations. The necessities and the niceties all come from the sky. Airlifted by Huey, a vital link in the logistics of today's Army. Although heliborne operations are routine, there are still convoys on the limited roads throughout Vietnam. And since the danger of ambush is ever present, armed assault Hueys have the assignment of flying convoy escort missions. How effective has this been in preventing ambush by the VC? Without the protection of an armed Huey, the probability of ambush increases. Like all countries in the monsoon belt, the economy of Vietnam is strongly dependent upon a complex network of rivers and canals. The seasonal rains make cross-country mobility virtually impossible for about 5 months of the year. There is probably more tonnage of supplies shipped by water than overland. An incredible variety of sampans, junks, canoes, and other shallow draft boats ply the waterways of Vietnam. To maintain this vital artery of commerce requires constant patrol activity, both on the water and in the surrounding fields where the constant threat of ambush lurks. Anywhere that American and Vietnamese troops go, Huey is there, providing reconnaissance, fire support, and mobility functions for the men who patrol these waterways, keeping the lines of commerce open for a nation which is quilted by guerrilla warfare. Deep in the rainforests of Vietnam, when even the primitive trails become impassable, helicopters provide the vital link to remote strategic hamlets. While the sounds of helicopters can be heard throughout Vietnam on various missions, in the Central Plains, our major combat engagement is rapidly reaching a climax. As the Viet Cong attempt to break off the engagement and slip into the protective coloration of their inhospitable terrain, American and Vietnamese troops can be leapfrogged over them to attack from a different direction or cut an escape route. Using radio communication, the ground commander can get both the quick airlift for his troops and the aerial fire support to cover a flanking maneuver. Redeployment of troops can be done quickly, and the men arrive at their next engagement in condition to fight. The swirling confusion of ground combat begins again. Every rice paddy a possible battlefield, every hut a potential ambush. So casualties are not limited to the Viet Cong. Medical corpsmen are in the field, but the key factor is that in a matter of minutes, wounded can be in rear area hospitals receiving the best modern medical attention. This rapid medical evacuation has dramatically reduced the mortality rate for men fighting in Vietnam. In World War II, 4.5% of the wounded reaching hospitals died. In Vietnam, a man's chances are 5 times better, for less than 1% die. In Southeast Asia, more than 30,000 wounded have been airlifted by helicopter. Even with the growth of the Huey in filling the Army's varied needs, it still performs its original function, that of an aerial ambulance. Viet Cong prisoners of war, this is the face of the enemy. Men who stare with eyes filled with both fear and wonder. Captured weapons and ammunition that eloquently indicate the involvement of foreign countries in the arming and equipping of the Viet Cong. This whole helicopter-centered operation is typical of how the wealth of our nation is being used to reduce the hazard of war for the American soldier. Money is being spent rather than lives. It shows up in many ways. There has never been a war with such a fantastic level of firepower. Never in history has an army been supported by the mobility and firepower which helicopters provide. There are currently Hueys can land in flooded rice paddies where even wading is difficult. Perhaps the greatest paradox about the Hueys in Vietnam is that they have suffered very few losses to enemy ground fire. Although they fly slower, lower, and in more constant exposure to enemy fire than fixed-wing aircraft, they have shown a marked ability to perform evasive maneuvers. Vietnam reinforces a point that military planners have long understood. You can't win a modern war with yesterday's weapons and tactics. This is the real lesson of Vietnam. It is also a test of our national technology to develop the weapons which can help win and sustain peace. Weapons which provide unprecedented military mobility in the underdeveloped areas of the world. The conflict in Vietnam is more than a struggle for a segment of Southeast Asia, more even than the freedom of one nation. Vietnam is the unhappy land which fate has selected for a test of the will and defensive capability of the United States to protect the smaller free nations of the world.